Good everything. Hi, Nubians and others. Good
Hey,
morning, Dr. Carr, in a place that's going to give people. It's like that warning, that you might get a stroke
trigger warning.
if you don't see books, maybe
Right.
people are like,
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, I mean, as Harry Belafonte, what is it? This is his memoir, My Song. He says at the beginning of part three, what does he say? He said, "Do it all.
let me
Do it
see.
all."
Hold it
Oh,
up.
this is the My Song,
That's
a
a thick
memoir.
book. That means he's lived a life, huh?
Oh, and it was published in what 2011. It's 465 pages, and I don't mind showing y'all he signed it.
Oh, wait, hold on, hold on.
So
Wait,
anyway, I let y'all
wait.
know. But he
No, just
signed a bunch of these. This is his. This is his sign.
humble flex. Go ahead. Let me
No,
see.
it's definitely a flex. No, no, not even humble. Are you kidding? No, I'm like Harry Belafonte said. Oh, but anyway, we'll talk about that. But his thing is, he said at the beginning, I think, of part two of the book, he said, I'm not a singer or an actor who became an activist. I'm an activist who became a singer, became a performer. So yeah, I mean, I'm out. Well, if you see me out in the streets, almost 10 times out of 10, I'm somewhere working, just like you.
Yeah, I've been contemplating. Thank you. I picked up last night Beloved because there was an article in the New York Times that inspired me to pick it up. And I was wondering if these last 3 years, which have transformed a lot of the ways that I think, thank you, if I would approach that differently. And I was just thinking about the responsibility of a human being to constantly check and challenge themselves to am I doing what I was put here to do? Am I answering the call? Am I being called? Is there a pull on my life beyond getting up every day, going to work, getting a check, having the weekends, eating shrimp, watching TV, raising the children, rinse and repeat, retire, like, is there more? And I think, having a luxury to contemplate that unbothered by the pull of people. And then you look at that 400-page book and you absolutely know, as somebody that has written 20 plus memoirs with others who were in their 20s, and it's like the only book that I've done with somebody that was seasoned was probably Kris Jenner and Everything Kardashians. Everyone else was in their 20s, and I wonder if they were to do a book now, how different would it be? And we don't allow ourselves to, it's like celebrities, and then they get frozen, and then that's who they are. And
That's right. All those, and it's funny. I mean, parenthetically, I was listening to a conversation you were having, and you said, it's one thing when people weigh in on things that they haven't done. But if I'm going to talk about writing, if I'm going to talk about, I mean, I've written 30 plus books. I mean, it was very powerful to hear you say that, because it reminded me of something Asa Hilliard used to talk about. He said, teachers teach through what they do. It might seem like they're teaching by what they say, but taking it out of the classroom, we all learn from people based on what they do, and what you walk that walk. I mean, so sure, our conversations have enriched and enlightened me, and I think all of us. And it's an extension of what you do every day. It's an extension, and that piece that's coming out in tomorrow's New York Times, I think it's Jenna Wortham wrote on Christina Sharp, whose new book Ordinary Notes dropped about a month ago, not quite a month ago. It's very interesting because, I mean, here's a sister, brilliant, thinking about place, thinking about our people, thinking about blackness, and then they have a big convening to talk about maroonage in Europe. And I'm like, this is how minstrelsy works. I
so
mean, I hate to just do that, but
no,
I mean,
no. I mean, I posted a clip, and it's like we're in such a reactionary mode. I'm not shading Stephen A. Smith at all. I was making a larger point about what JJ Redick was saying about having gone through injury as an NBA player. It's a different experience, and not that you don't have the right to talk about it, but like I said, if you ask me about writing, I can do that. Anything else, politics, I'm gonna bring on an expert. If it's a law thing, I'm looking for the legal minds, right? I'm and I'll ask questions, because in that case, I'm a student. I'm not an expert, right? So I try to fill my life with experts, as opposed to in the things I know. Sit down, but I don't know a lot. There's so
none
much
of
more I
us do.
don't know. So it's just, I feel like if we all approach life like, there's so much I don't know. Let me go find the people who know, as you would say, no.
No.
Yeah. And I read that article too, and I will say I also do this.
What's that?
I will chew up the meat and spit out the bones.
So
there was one line in there that led me back to Beloved, and it's like, be loved.
Yes.
Which was a directive, and she wonders if Toni Morrison made that as a directive as opposed to Dearly Beloved, which of course is in the opening pages. So when she put that, I was like, be loved. Wow. Okay. Let me go back and see if it rings for me. So
and it's very powerful. I mean, I think it's something that's, it's something we have to sit with. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I came up late last night from DC, and Philly's my adopted hometown. I'm not going to get a chance to see anybody really because I'm back as soon as I finish here. But we have to sit with being. We have to be, and to be is a mystery. I mean, like I said the last time I was here for the Center for Black Educator Development, our brother Sharif El Mekki, who I'll see later on, and pass the greetings to him from you. Nothing stays the same. And this is a city, as I told my students at Howard, for the 10 years of overlap that I lived still here in Philly and commuted to DC to teach. Every morning I get up 4 in the morning in the city where they made up America, and I take the train down to the city they made up for America. And it's all myth making. And just being here again, and last night I was walking around a little bit, and there's so many banks on Market Street, which of course ironically began as the center street for commerce in this criminal enterprise city, for the criminal enterprise called United States of America. I love how Alton Maddox, who we'll talk about a little bit today, as he made his transition on 23rd, Attorney Maddox used to say, he said, he taught con law all the time. And I remember one lecture, he had a photograph of George Washington and James Madison, James Madison, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and them, the signers of the so-called Declaration of Independence and the framers of the Constitution, which is down the street, of course, of the old Pennsylvania State House, Independence Hall. And Alton Maddox said, this is a picture of what some people call the Founding Fathers. I refer to them as the fleeing felons. And then he went on to start talking about how the Constitution is basically a contract between criminals for a criminal enterprise called United States of America. So, I mean, but when we think about it, it's all myth making and everything changes.
I mean, I just got the proofs, the uncorrected proofs from Michael Harriot's new book, which is absolute fire.
It's Black AF. Is it still got the same title?
Yes, and it's absolute fire. I said, this man, first of all, genius. It inspired me because I was like, he could write his ass off. Let me just say that out loud. The way he strings together these words and tell these stories, he's a master storyteller. I was very inspired, and I was like, now that brought me back to Beloved as well, because I'm like, I gotta, it's like you if you want to do a thing, and writing is not my talent or my gift as much as it is a craft. You got to keep that. You got to keep the craft going. We'll talk about Duke Ellington. There are people who are naturally gifted in a thing. And then there are people that have to work at it. I have to work at writing. It doesn't just come naturally to me. I'm good, but to be great or to be very good, I have to constantly be in that word. I don't get up every day with the desire to sit down and write. I'm not a writer by gift. It doesn't come to me. But when I read great writing, I'm like,
well, that's what you have to be able to do, right? I mean, they say that, you can be a reader without being a writer, but you can't really be a great writer without being a reader. So you recognize great writing. Let me ask you, though, about that, because, I think about my man, Mark Lamont Hill, who's up the street. He talks about, not, having to put his behind in the seat and put those words on paper. But what in your mind as I would say master craftsperson, and that's not just me, obviously, I mean, what's the difference between the spoken word and the written word for you, having achieved level Master.
Light years, you know, and sitting with Michael's book, it jumps off the page. You know, you've heard him talk.
Of course.
You know,
but and I read his writing. He's mastered the short form, social media.
No, when he writes,
yes,
it's a different thing. For me, Absolutely. It's the opposite. Maybe not quite the opposite, but because I have worked on me, I feel no fear behind the mic. You know, because there's a scripture out of the overflow of the heart. I've worked on my heart enough. So whatever comes out. So if you're taking it away, I know what my intent is. So I can always back it up. And if I'm wrong, I will admit it. Right. So I never struggle behind the mic because I'm very clear about what the mission is when this mic is open. It's freedom, right? It's liberation. It's, you know, it's inspiration to remind people we got, you know, I'm watching Jalen Hurts. I'm watching the Baltimore Ravens, whose
Lamar Jackson.
Lamar Jackson's mama was like, "Oh, Jalen Hurts."
Isn't that the way it's supposed to be?
Yes.
In other words, I know you got an agent, but I got my mama.
I got no, but
also, my mama is better than your agent.
Nicole Lynn, that black woman who reached out to Jalen Hurts when he was getting out of college, saying, "I mean, cold call. I want to be your agent," and he was like, "Okay, I'll interview you." And fast forward, signed the largest contract, guaranteed money in the history. And then the next day, because people were trashing Lamar Jackson, including me, you know, everyone, because I'm following the bouncing ball, because don't nobody really know anything. Oh, he's stupid. He needs to get an agent. Look at what Jalen Hurts. But I'm sure his mom was like, "Oh, that lady got that much. This is easy now." And this is why we have to demand the most, because now that put pressure. There's a framework now right there.
No question.
I see what is possible.
No question.
Always see the possibilities.
Yeah, because we had the power.
Yes.
I mean, you know, the NCAA and the NBA were about to engage in a criminal conspiracy to try to exclude LeBron James, man, because everybody has to have a college degree. LeBron was like, "No problem. You really want to dance?" And they backed up off that quick. Rich Paul continues to work. I mean, when will we realize, Prof, that we are the center? They're the periphery. And by they, I mean those who would exploit our labor, our resources. And in this case of Brother Hurts and Brother Jackson, who I've never seen a player down in football and probably never will, but nevertheless, that's not the point. We see these sisters say, and I tell elementary school students this all the time, man, junior high school students, middle school students. I said, "How many of y'all want to play basketball, football?" All the hands go up. And I said, "Okay, how many of y'all want to be lawyers for them that got their hands up?" Nobody put their hands up. I said, "See, the trick is that's your friend. If he make the lead, that's your friend. If she make the lead, you be the lawyer, and then you sit up in the suite and eat food, and you making money off them. But y'all cool." Oh yeah, start thinking about being the lawyers. Everybody ain't got to play ball,
or not being the lawyers, because you don't need a law degree to say, "Run me $5 more million."
Rich Paul. Yes,
I'm in full disclosure, you know, I've written 30 books and I've only used an agent twice. I negotiate my own contracts because I know what the deals are and I know what my value is, and I want more. And some would argue, "Oh, you should have someone as a buffer so they can play good." I don't play games. You know what it is.
Well, you've used the agent 30 times. Her name's Karen Hunter.
Yes.
You ain't playing by their rules.
Right. And, you know, but when you know, right? So
no question.
We have to be in the seat of knowing and not think that everybody has more information than we do.
You know, that's very powerful you say that, because when Alton Maddox was barred from practicing law, they did not strip him completely of his license. As he said, he still had to pay his bar dues. And as we see these social structure obituaries excoriate him, the Washington Post, New York Daily News, so forth, for the Tawana Brawley hoax, you know, again, this is why this Africana Studies framework is so important. And later on this morning, I'll be with Ishmael Jimenez and the folk here at the School District of Philadelphia. They're having in-service professional development convening of educators to talk about Africana Studies here in the district. And I'm very happy to join them later on this morning to have this conversation and to reiterate the importance of this conceptual category framework, because that framework gives us a different lens. And we'll talk more about this in a minute. But I'm bringing it up in the context of what we're talking about now because, you know, the social structure obituaries for Alton Henry Maddox Jr., one of the most brilliant legal minds produced in this criminal enterprise in the last century called United States. Alton Maddox, was excoriated for not giving up basically Tawana Brawley by coming and testifying about what his strategy and he said no, and he said, here's where I'm from, born in Inkster, black town in Michigan, near Detroit. Father wouldn't let him work for white people. Grew up in Georgia, just outside of Atlanta. But he said, and he used to say this all the time, he said, in 1918, there was a sister named Mary Turner. Mary Turner was lynched because she complained about the lynching of her husband. She was 8 months pregnant. When these white boys strung her up on Folsom's Bridge in Brooke County, Georgia, May 19th, 1918. May 19th is an auspicious day, and then it's Malcolm X's birthday. Yuri Kochiyama, as we talked about, Lorraine Hansberry, but they killed Mary Turner on May 19th, 1918. And I'll just say, as they lynched her, they cut open her stomach. The baby came out alive. They killed the baby. He said, I'm always going to protect black women. Protect black women is not just a hashtag of today. The reason that Alton Maddox would not allow the wolves to get at Tawana Brawley is because she was a girl. And not just because she was female. I mean, she was a child. She's a teenager. And he said, to understand where I'm coming from, see, that's governance. Who are we to each other? I don't give a damn about your courts. And he didn't practice law after that. Fortunately, he was still able to practice law when he got a 67 count indictment. He won the case that allowed Al Sharpton not to go to jail. And finally, Reverend Sharpton made a public comment about Alton Maddox, leading with he hadn't seen him in 20 years and they had some ideological differences. You better be glad you didn't have any ideological differences. One of the best courtroom lawyers produced in this criminal enterprise got your ass off that 67 count indictment, sir. Couldn't wait to get that statement out about Harry Belafonte, though. And I'm not mad at Al. I don't know Al Sharpton. I just know that Alton Maddox was a governance structure warrior, not to be confused with a soldier. Soldiers usually, do what people tell them to do. A warrior is somebody who is defending their way of life, and they only go to war when they have to. They don't like war, but they are trained at it, and it's usually in defense, self-defense. But for Alton Maddox, the best defense was good offense. So I'm just bringing that up in the context of what we've opened with today, to think about what it means to be for us. Alton Maddox is one of those people. So the social structure, who we are to each other, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but ultimately we have to grapple with that. So I can't wait to read Mike's book, because he's been working on it now for a couple of years, and I know that it is hot fire. So I can't wait to see how he gets at this question of our historical memory.
I see not your fingerprints, but the space's fingerprints. I feel in many ways, I know that being
in the book, yeah. I would assume.
Yeah. Being in community with you has liberated my mind even more. And I already thought I was free, right?
All of us. No.
There are levels to this, right? And so, and we may not all be at the same level of freedom. Some of us are still tethered to the fear that somebody somehow is gonna come. They gonna come. They gonna do. They. We still in theyville.
My goodness.
So, and I think about Bill Russell. I was reading this week too. Had an FBI file, and I was like, I'm watching this Grand Wizard Clan thing on YouTube, this docu-series about Florida's Klan folk in the prison system, killing folk. And I was like, y'all got whole files on people that all they wanted was liberation. And there are actual terrorists, folk like Timothy McVeigh blowing up buildings and killing children, people killing children, Sandy Hook, people killing children, Uvalde, killing Black people in church, killing people in Charlottesville, killing people in Buffalo. There are whole organizations, multiple, and y'all had a file on Bill Russell.
I mean, who's a terrorist and who's a patriot? Timothy McVeigh read the Turner Diaries, and when you read his trial testimony, he says, I'm defending the country. What the hell's wrong with y'all? And, you know, as time has unfolded, seems like he is more consistent with the type of things we've seen tolerated in this country than those like Bill Russell who were fighting against it. And they're not only not tolerated, they're persecuted. Sure. Of course he's got a file. You probably got a file.
You probably do too. But I mean, those are I take.
Hopefully, I hope I earned a file.
Do you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know,
what are you looking for? Well, I mean, I was just like Bill Russell, though, like all that he has done and been through. Like, what were y'all looking for? You know, you worried about the Black Panther. What are they fighting for? Watching this Tupac documentary. What is the battle on this side that makes you so nervous? You know, that people just want you to keep the foot off the neck and move forward and have freedom and equity and rights. But that requires a file to study and have a COINTELPRO. But meanwhile, there are people that actually stormed the Capitol. They were plotting that for, and you had a sitting president that you could have gotten rid of forever, and you did not do it. So it does beg the question, like, what is this country's foundational principles?
Well, we know the answer to that. It's not for our common humanity. I mean, they're looking for what they are looking for based on how they view themselves and view us. And by that, I mean just regular rank and file people. I mean, Sterling Brown, when we talked about Sterling Brown a couple of weeks ago, tying it back to something we talked about a couple of years ago, that volume Rayford Logan edited called What the Negro Wants. When Sterling Brown put that chapter in there called Count Me In, he said, you know, when people talk about census and people talk about what Black people want, and you say, well, we're not represented here. We're not represented here. The answer comes back, well, we count the people who count. Meaning what? You know, I got a file on Bill Russell because he's against what I believe in. Our mistake is thinking that what we believe in is what this structure is set up to believe in. It's simply not true. And so we move to the thing, well, these people did this. So what about this? Oh, no, I'm sorry. You don't have, in fact, it's so funny. I'm reading this book. I finally got a copy of it, written in International Law in West Africa. This is it. The Practice of Empire. The reason I'm reading it is because, you know, often when we talk about how these Europeans came in and carved up Africa for resources, we talk about that scramble for Africa, 1884, 1885. But what Professor Inga van Huel does is give us a nice treatment of British legal strategy and legal architecture in Africa beginning in the 19th century, around the 1830s, 1840s. And what she's arguing here is that the legal, in fact, I'll just read a quick, he says that, let me see, let me find here. I just read from the jacket. She reviews the use and creation of legal instruments that expanded or delineated the boundaries between British jurisdiction and African communities in West Africa, and uncovers the practicality and flexibility with which international legal discourse was employed in imperial contexts. This legal experimentation went beyond treaties of cession and also encompassed commercial treaties, the abolition of the slave trade, and extraterritoriality, and the use of force. She says that these legal instruments were not done, and legal ordering was not done in reference to adjudication before Western courts or the writings of Western lawyers, but in reference to what was deemed politically expedient and practically feasible by imperial agents. Now, what does that mean? Let's translate it. In fact, let's bring it back to the criminal enterprise called United States of America and the case study of what just happened in North Carolina with the North Carolina State Supreme Court. Anybody who now continues to think that the court system is not thoroughly political and that expediency and pragmatic decision-making based on power is not at the center of jurisprudence for a lot of people, all you have to do, you don't have to read this book about West Africa in the 19th century and how the British basically did whatever they needed to do to maintain power or to extend power. You can look at the state of North Carolina where they said that the maps drawn by the North Carolina legislature, which a majority of the Supreme Court by one vote, when those elected who identified with the Democratic Party were in the majority, said violated the North Carolina Constitution. Now that there are white nationalists in the majority under the cover of the Republican Party at the Supreme Court of North Carolina, they have reversed themselves with no new law, no new statutes, simply naked ass power. And so this probably, you know, Angie Porter was talking about this the other day. We were talking about it. This is in part probably an attempt to head off the Supreme Court decision in Moore versus Harper. They're about to tear up their criminal enterprise. It's a beautiful thing, really, because it will allow us to rethink and hopefully renegotiate. And by us, I mean those of us who value our common humanity over anything else. They, you know, the Moore versus Harper cases we talked about at the time it was argued last year. This is a case where they're pushing something called the independent state legislature theory. Basically, that the federal government has no say in what state legislatures do when they run elections, including federal elections. Well, if this current Supreme Court, which seems to be unspooling by the day, shout out to Brett Kavanaugh, who is now the report came out a couple of days ago talking about the FBI investigation, which wasn't an investigation, and how those who wanted to testify indeed are now saying, no, you were at that fraternity house. Yeah, you whipped out your stuff. Yeah, you put it in her face. And yeah, all that stuff. In fact, there's a documentary I guess we'll all see shortly that premiered at Sundance and is being updated to reflect what has happened since, that we'll all be able to see. But, you know, Sam Alito is mad, you know, kind of tracking, as he always has, to the African-American maxim, the hit dog hollers, is complaining about people not legitimizing the court and, you know, this kind of thing. Of course, Clarence Thomas is just somewhere on the Riviera or wherever he is on his friend's yacht. But the point is, as that thing unspools, what we see is that, you know, the naked political force is there. And Moore versus Harper, a case where they have the numbers on the Supreme Court now to possibly say that no, the federal government has no say in what these rogue legislatures do, particularly these white nationalist legislatures behind the cotton curtain. That would send shockwaves through the country in ways second only to, in the short term, what we saw with the Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health, the overturning of Roe versus Wade, although this would be another blow to the illusion that this is somehow a country where the best interests of the people who live in the country are ahead of any other interests. And so they might have headed that off with this North Carolina Supreme Court decision that came down a couple of days ago, saying that, you know, the legislatures have full power to do whatever the hell they want in terms of gerrymandering and districting, and it'll probably give them a super majority of white nationalists in the North Carolina legislature, and also in the United States Congress. They may pick up 3 seats in the U.S. Congress as a result of this criminal enterprise, and the Supreme Court of North Carolina is not going to stop them now because they have the votes. And so I'm saying all that to say as a backdrop to say that the facade is slipping. The facade is slipping, and we have to come up with solutions. And so as I'm sitting here in Philadelphia again, in a little while to sit with some educators who are doing the African-American history course here in the public schools and in high schools. And then a little bit later on this afternoon, sitting with my long-term, long-distance running comrades in Philadelphia Freedom Schools, now overseen by the Center for Black Educator Development, Sharif El-Mekki, and particularly 2 of my former students who are now really in charge of developing and continuing that work around Freedom Schools, Stephanie Joy Tisdale and Asheray Hines. Really, really, really looking forward to this afternoon. We are grappling with, all of us that is, with this question of how we resist and not make resistance the center of our identity. That's the question. This summer, for example, we're going to be reading this book in Freedom Schools called State on Freedom. You heard me mention it before. The Long History of Black Power Through One Family's Journey. This is Mama Zahara Simmons and Baba Michael Simmons, former members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, central to the formations that we know, not only as SNCC, but the things that come after that. Michael Simmons of Philadelphia and Zahara Simmons in Philadelphia. Baba Michael is going to be here tonight. We're going to all be in conversation with him about this. And the challenge we have, and these are two Black internationalists, by the way. So they're at the heart of the so-called civil rights movement as it's narrated by the social structure. But more importantly, they're at the heart of Black community, not just here in Philadelphia, not just in Mississippi and Freedom Summit, not just in Atlanta with the Atlanta Project, not just, but internationally, Africa, the rest of the world, Europe, I mean, all the way cycling through the Caribbean. And that work forces us to grapple with something I'm going to spend a few minutes on today, thinking about the life of Harry Belafonte. In the context of this article that was it's going to be in the New York Times Magazine tomorrow about Christina Sharp, written by Jenna Wortham. I think we have to ask ourselves, we have to question ourselves when we think about this question of Blackness. That's what we've been doing for now 3+ years. One of the things when we talk about this morning when we were the school district folk, is there anything to the centering of long view memory as a tool for forming resistance to these social formations that keep us trapped as a species? In other words, what is the value of remembering? The momentum of memory. There's a lot going on this week and this weekend through next weekend. This is we just opened 39th Annual Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations Conference. It's going to be funny because when as the world kind of tries to open back up, if you've been following real estate conversations, I'm just like reading this stuff about Hudson Yards and what's going on in Manhattan and how these people can't get these people to come back to work in the office. And I'm seeing it in real time in DC and here in Philly, which is crazy. But as I'm reading this stuff, I'm thinking going online is what allowed us to jailbreak the university. And as a result of us now having this global convening, these regular global convenings, 7 days a week, really, then, how are we gonna use that to inform the physical convenings we have? Well, last night we opened the ASCAC conference. And if you all want to register, you can. It's ascac.org. We're going to be going not just yesterday, not just today, not just tomorrow, but through the week until next week. In fact, I think I give my talk on Saturday afternoon, next Saturday. So you can see the schedule when you go on the website, this kind of thing. But I'm raising it because we had our opening with our brother, fellow Nubian, and a teacher at a metametric class in Nubia, Mario Beatty, who is the international president of the association. I'm first vice president. Second vice president, Larry Crow. All the folks, many of the folk who are now in Nubia, Kathy Adams, Angie Porter, Lee Watkins, so many others involved in the association. Well, our theme this year is on the oral and written word in Africa. It's one of the reasons, Prof, I asked you about the relationship between the oral and the written word. Because a great deal of how we think about ourselves in the contemporary world, particularly we start talking about Black resistance and we talk about Black thinking work, is linked to the written word. Mm-hmm. And, I think about, obviously Christina Sharp, whose work I'm very familiar with, In the Wake, probably the work that people know her best from. One of the people interviewed in the article for the New York Times, Saidiya Hartman, who's done some really remarkable kind of archival work. And Christina Sharp's new book, Ordinary Notes, is a series of vignettes, kind of small cluster responses to visual images, to memories, almost like a day by day, not day by day, but one of the things we talked about last night when Mario opened, he quoted from And those of you who've taken metanetia, you're probably familiar with the word chesu. Chesu is like, the literal translation is knot, like a knot, but it means a phrasing or a saying or a piece of sebait, a wisdom saying that you have to sit with to untangle, to untie, because ultimately that its meaning will be something that is revealed to you as you think about it in terms of your own life. And this is something very, very essential when it comes to world cultures. But I'm thinking now about African people. We see it in the ancient Egyptian. We see it in the Yoruba with the Odu Ifa. We see it in the Ethiopian texts. We think of a philosopher like Yaraqab, early philosopher, I think maybe 15th century. I'm going by memory now. I'm not in my library. So, well, John Clark said you got to keep it in your head anyway. Hatata being the word, maybe in Ge'ez, which, it's like a knot, like a grinding. Hatata means grinding. What is the essential thing? But anyway, what Mario talked about last night in his opening remarks is that he took one of the Chesu, one of the teachings, Sebait of Tao Tep. And those of you taking a metanetia class, you learn how to translate that text, getting the tools to translate that text, one of the oldest books of wisdom literature in human memory, in contemporary human memory. And the phrase that he took from that text is one of the most powerful moments in a very powerful set of texts. Christina Sharp, obviously her new book, Ordinary Notes, is a series of vignettes. Well, Tao Tep is a series of vignettes as well, except this series of vignettes is probably about 4,500 years old. And one of the things that Tao Tep says, when hearing enters the hearer becomes as a master hearer. Or when hearing enters the listener becomes like a master hearing. There's a difference between listening and hearing. It's got internalized. And so, go ahead. No,
I wanted to ask you, because the question that you asked just landed with me. And I feel like it's when I listen to you, your mind is organized, like you have file cabinets and information, and you're able to pull it because of experiences and things you've read and things you've done. Mm-hmm. And you critically think is what Daniel Black was talking about Monday and Monday on my show before that. Yes. And I feel like we haven't been trained to critically think, but we have been indoctrinated through words, right? Since the Europeans took over. And I remember one of the first conversations I asked, how do we learn? And you just said around a tree with storytelling elders, many generations would sit, but the elders would convey the story through the word, right? Through the spoken word. And that's how we learn. And now we learn through books, where I was just telling my students yesterday, you are taught to regurgitate what's in this book, and you have to give it back to me exactly how it is to get a good grade. And so for your entire career in school, whether it's right or wrong, your reward came in regurgitating something that we gave you. That's right. And the first book was the Bible on purpose. First book ever disseminated was the Bible, because we needed to be indoctrinated into a way of knowing. And we've been taught that if it's not in the book, then it doesn't exist. So even those of us who write, if we haven't processed this, then we are also a tool of a system that is meant to indoctrinate people into a way of knowing and a way of thinking. So I'm sitting here right now, and I want to ask you, as you bring up Mario Beatty, the Egyptians did, they wrote the first writers, the first processors, disseminators of information, but they never, ever left off the spoken word. Like no. It works hand in hand.
No.
And all we have is rap right now. And half them rappers don't read and they don't know. So how does this work, Dr. Carr? I mean, you brought up Harry Belafonte, who was an avid reader and understood the role of using his art. Then went into folk music because it hit your soul to convey messages. He didn't just keep quiet. There was an exchange of this to this to this to the soul. Where are we right now?
Well, first of all, I think this is where it gets challenging, right, Prof? When we think about this, we've never left. In fact, the theme of our conference this year is the word. We're talking about oral and written, but at the essence is what you said. It's the word. How do we communicate? The Egyptians created a writing system out of which was derived. It is one of the principal foundations for eventually the Phoenician script and then beyond. So you get these 26 characters we use in the contemporary world in terms of the English speaking world. I'm not talking about China, I'm not talking about Korea, other forms of script. But the 26 character system we call the alphabet, which isn't symbol systems at all, but markers for sounds. So the word never is displaced, but whereas we use these symbols for sound, so like you said, you know, Professor Sharp said, I sit with beloved, and then she says, or at least Jenna Wortham writes, she says she treats that book with all of its notes and all its paginations and all the stickies that she's got in there. She takes to class. Almost, she didn't call it a Bible. What did she call it? Somebody had to look it up. I can't think. But anyway, the function of a Bible, almost like a sacred text. Well, that in many ways follows along with the whole concept of chesu.
You're devotional.
Devotional. There it is. Right. Thank you. And so to talk about be loved, well, that doesn't displace. And remember, at the end of the article, remember, she's talking about the sister that she saw. I think she was at the Tate Modern in England, if memory serves me correctly from memory. And she said she saw the sister and she spoke, and then the sister didn't recognize her. Didn't recognize her greeting at first. But when she did, she said, "Oh, I've been here X number of years and nobody ever stopped and talked to me." And then she said, "Well, I see you." And the sister said, "I know." And then she said, "We see each other." Be loved presumes a state of being that it raises the question: can you be loved by yourself? So, you know, when you say beloved, that's almost like an infinitive. I mean, that's a condition, you know, this is the state of being loved. When we say be loved and she takes it apart, my question is, where are you going with this? Are you cracking open the language to help free us? And the answer to that is, of course, yes. But my question, this is the question I'm going to raise again today, and I will raise it till I stop breathing, is when we raise these questions, what is preventing us from asking ourselves for answers? I don't mean asking ourselves for answers in this living moment. I mean dipping into what Jake Cross called the deep well of our memory. See, it's one thing to talk about resistance. It's one thing to talk about being present. It's quite another to really take seriously. Do we take ourselves seriously enough to engage in inquiry of ourselves over time and space? The answer to that for most, even professional academics, is no. Because embarrassingly, no, let me not say that, because I don't want to make a pejorative out of this, because I think it's incredibly difficult. It's not as difficult as people make it, but it is hard. We anchor our concepts of self in Blackness. The more I think about it, the more I think that's a problem. Blackness is a condition that we did not create. So the question then becomes, is it a condition, a social condition, a social structure condition that we can use as a tool to liberate ourselves? Or is the reiteration of Blackness in the way that we have received it something that not only will continue to trap us, but will do it so much more exquisitely that really what we're doing is just, you know, maybe painting our chains a little bit, you know, maybe changing the metal in it a little bit, but ultimately not getting our chains off. Let me be very, 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 very specific about this. When you think about ancient Egyptian language, for example, something that many people now kind of dismiss derisively, oh, that's those hoteps, no problem. I mean, I understand this education very well. I think Asa Hilliard raised this, and we played a little bit of Asa last night by way of bringing the ancestors into the room. One thing Dr. Hilliard said, he says, you know, when you want to oppress a people, you take their memory. He said, in the case of African people who created these repositories of knowledge and passed them on for centuries and millennia, the disruption of Africa required disrupting the memory. He said, and the disruption of memory was so severe that in the case of something like ancient Egyptian, it took centuries to recover the capacity to begin to listen to the ancestors through what they had left. And even that's just a remnant. So we started talking about ancient Egyptian. We just got a remnant. Imagine if it had been unbroken. Now, if it had been unbroken, maybe it looks like China. I'm going somewhere with this, Prop. I'm going
I
somewhere.
know. I just told somebody. I just said it in the chat. He's saying something.
Yeah, no, no, because I try to read a few different kind of papers, and this is the China Daily. This comes out a couple of times a week. China Daily. I've talked about this before. This is one of the papers that comes out of China, and I'm sure many people say it's propaganda, and I would agree. Just like USA Today, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post. So the whole idea, it's all propaganda. I mean, well, let me not say propaganda. Let me not be that. It's all narratives from certain perspectives. But this caught my eye. BRICs, y'all know what that is, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. This article from Thursday's paper says a remarkable event occurred at the beginning of the year to which few gave much attention. The GDP of the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, surpassed that of the G7 countries, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United States, and the United Kingdom, in terms of purchasing power parity. In addition, BRICS' share of world GDP reached 31.5%, while the G7 accounted for 30.7%. According to data published by the UK-based economic research firm Acorn Macro Consulting, the gap is expected to be broadened by 2030. Ahead of the 15th BRICS Summit, which will be held from August 22nd to 24th in Durban, South Africa, the host country's foreign minister, Naledi Pandor, said 12 countries are interested in joining the BRICS group, including Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Algeria, Argentina, Mexico, and Nigeria. Them last two, Mexico and Nigeria. And this will be considered at the upcoming summit. Among others who are willing to join are Indonesia and Turkey. This is interesting because we're not talking about people with the same political worldview. Certainly, we're talking about the Turks. Come on now. With that expansion, the total population of BRICS members would exceed 4.3 billion, more than half the planet's population. The GDP of the renewed BRICS Plus could reach 30 trillion, which would be more than the GDP of the United States, which was 25.46 trillion in 2022. Where am I going with that? As the hillbilly horde tears up their funky ass country in places like North Carolina, Texas, Florida. As Andrew DeSantis, with dreams of being the president of this place called United States in his head, punches Mickey Mouse in the face. As they try to bring The Handmaid's Tale to life in these states where they're trying to ban a woman's right to terminate a pregnancy completely, China, which might be what parts of Africa would look like had they not been so rudely intervened, and not that China wasn't disrupted as well, but China was too far geographically to be disrupted in the way that Africa was, and also organized differently. China might look closer to what parts of where we are from originally would have looked like had we not been so rudely interrupted. Their attitude now is, rather than keep banging on the door of the West, I did a count. We got more people. Yo, why are we even tripping about this? Now, I'm going to raise this too in the context. I'm coming back. I haven't really left Harry Belafonte, but I'm going to come back to this in a minute. There was an article by the Chinese ambassador to Guinea-Bissau in maybe Tuesday's China Daily. Guo Che. Y'all can go to China Daily, ChinaDailyGlobal.com. All this stuff is free. They're giving it away. Of course they are, right? Because the whole thing is trying to change the narrative. Ambassador Guo Che wrote an article entitled, well, I forget what the name of it is, but he was talking about the China Global Civilization Initiative. This is an enterprise that the Chinese have started to say that all civilizations contribute to our common humanity. Some places, however, have been disrupted by other people. And this ambassador to this West African country, Chinese ambassador, is saying, now this, he ain't nothing altruistic because, China wants the same resources that everybody else wants out of Africa. But their approach is to say, we are going to decenter any one civilization, any one society as being better than any other. In fact, he writes this, he says, no civilization is better than any other civilization. We all learn from each other. The Chinese have learned from so many over the millennia and contribute to this global store of knowledge. And we propose that we have this formation where we all come in with this exchange. That's very different than American exceptionalism. Now, China's still going to be in the UN, still going to be in the Security Council, still going to be in all these other conversations. But rather than try to plead their way into humanity, they over here saying, based on these thousands of years of unbroken experience we have, we bringing our momentum of memory to bear on everybody else. And we're saying you have a momentum of memory too, which is why I was fascinated by this article. You have a momentum of memory. He doesn't characterize it that way. I'm characterizing it this way for a reason. That is not weight work as I read it interpreted by a lot of people who are writing today in the academy, who are writing largely to each other and to those who kind of sponsor them. And then it's like, oh, this is brilliant. Yeah, but how do it free us? I see the initial thrust is to use who we are to resist. But the question is, are you accessing the memory deeply enough? And can you even do it? Of course, the answer to that is yes. But how would you know whether we were or weren't accessing it? Because you haven't even tried. In other words, the memory we keep talking about often when we talk about Blackness is the memory grounded in the trauma. So people say Black boy joy, Black girl joy, I feel seen. This is, in my mind, I read that as a very sincere, deliberate attempt to regain humanity. Or even when the challenge is to explode the notion of the human. I'm with that too. But where are you starting? Well, ultimately, it all keeps coming back to the trauma. That was yesterday. They laughing in China. What's wrong with y'all? Come, you know what? Rather than argue with y'all, let's just show you what it looks like and invite you to do that. But that traps too often those of us in the dispersal, the so-called diaspora. Now, I liken it to taking off a particular color of glasses and putting on another color and saying, oh, I didn't even see that. That's another spectrum. Right. We haven't taken the glasses off, or maybe even taking the glasses off altogether and trusting your natural vision. This is a challenge that we have. Now, you know, when we think about that in terms of our meaning makers, particularly those who achieve some form of visibility, here's where we turn to Brother Belafonte, where we were talking about last week on your show, Prof, and where everybody is talking about. When you achieve a certain level of visibility, which can be a combination of many factors, it could be, you know, well, we'll talk about it. It could be somehow your magnetism and charm. It could be a skill you have, perhaps throwing a ball through a hoop, or hitting another human being as you advance a ball down the field, or perhaps hitting a note in a way that is non-offensive, but somehow kind of multicultural without saying multicultural. You know, work all day for a drink of rum. Daylight come and me won't go home. Yeah, that's cool. That's, you know, it's kind of Caribbean, kind of calypso, kind of, you know, but it's a reworking. There was a guy who was very familiar with calypso who worked on that, the Deo song. I think Lord Bridges, as Belafonte writes about it, with this white dude, William Attaway, who was also a very important writer. They coming up with something that's not quite the folk song that was sung in the Caribbean and not quite the Western form, so they can capture them both. And of course, what the result is, that whole album, Calypso, you know, the first million-selling album, it stayed at the top of the charts for 30-some weeks. This is before Elvis hit. You know, it hit that sweet spot. But as you're doing it, you achieve a certain visibility. Harry Belafonte achieves certain visibility. Well, the question we're going to ask ultimately is, what do you do with that visibility? But when you think about culture that builds on a momentum of memory that isn't grounded in the trauma, as we sit here on Duke Ellington's birthday, I think 1899 is when he was born. So that would make him, 124 this year. If memory serves me correctly, I'm not looking it up. Ellington was asked many times, you know, how do you define your music? And we talked about, you know, my friend and brother, our brother Nick Payton, gesturing toward Louis Daniel Armstrong when he said it's only two kinds of music: good music and the other kind. But Duke Ellington, Edward Kennedy Ellington from Washington, D.C., Edward Kennedy Ellington said, at least in one of the interviews, one of the responses, and I first read the quote in maybe Thomas Brothers' book called Louis Armstrong's New Orleans, where Brothers is developing this theory of this African base for the modality that we now refer to as jazz, giving another social structure label to this music. Ellington said, well, I really don't have a definition, but if I had to say something, I would say maybe music with an African foundation that is interpreting these contemporary conditions or experiences. That is how Gil Scott-Heron talked about his music. He said, the blues, the blues just talks about the atmosphere, but this thing came from where we came from. That's the momentum of memory. I think that's probably why music is one of the things that transcends the trauma, that comments on the trauma, which is why I thought your conversation prior with our brother Carl Rittenhauer, better known as Chuck D, it's very important. It's very important because as he talked about what they were trying to do with Public Enemy as an extension of what had been going on before, when he said, I just want to play the background, but we did this, and then we get to this political moment, we had to confront it. It was very, very, very poignant. And of course, Chuck D, we know, continues to work because he's got this visibility now, and he's trying to use that visibility. He was talking about this last week. He interviewed, he came on Roland Martin's show, and on the same night I was on, usually on Thursday nights. And, near the end of his conversation, I asked him a question about, his process. And I talked about it in the context of something he did very recently, music that shook up the world. This Audible project where he's putting this music, this kind of socially conscious protest movement, socially grounded, culturally relevant music, and he's narrating in between, has these songs. He picked these songs that are representative, Stevie Wonder, you can imagine some of the songs. And I said, it's interesting because he was Roland brought him on to talk about Harry Belafonte and their relationship. He was talking about how he kind of takes that baton. And it was interesting to see you there with the Pass the Baton hoodie on. I see, no question. But I said, you did that, debuted last summer. And 20 years ago, Harry Belafonte put together Long Road to Freedom, which was another form of anthology, beginning with Africa and then bringing it all the way through to the year 2001, which I think it was released 2001 or 2002, with a handsome box set. If I was at the house, I would pull it and show it to everybody. But look up Long Road to Freedom. That's Harry Belafonte's anthology. Charles White, the artist, among many others. I think the cover is Henry Oswald Tanner, if memory serves me correctly. He puts this together, but he's curating. Why can he do that? Because he's Harry Belafonte. Why can Chuck D do what he's doing? Because he's Chuck D. When you get a certain form of visibility, what do you do with it in terms of trying to help us recover our memory, if indeed you think memory is important? And I can tell you right now that, of course, none of us knew that Harry Belafonte was going to make transition. And I think that this book, State on Freedom, is a good text. I mean, every summer in Philadelphia Freedom Schools, we pick a text that is beyond the expectation of teenagers. And we're not just in Philly now. Philly, Detroit, they've added, well, they had Camden, New Jersey before, with a project of adding a few more places. It's a beautiful thing. And certainly we're not alone. A lot of people do this kind of work. I'm just mentioning it because this is the one I'm most directly involved in. I got my old school trainer with Yehudi on it. Very proud of this old sweatshirt. We call them the Fan Lou Hamer trainers. Shout out to Kelly Mickens and all those folk who did that. But I think if I had it to do over again, I would recommend that we might read my song, Belafonte, because every page in here is about a memory keeper. And the question of what do you do with celebrity? And how, if you're a person of African descent, can you use celebrity? Should you use celebrity within the broad range of your own individual talents? How can you use celebrity to help free us, help us see ourselves? Another thing Asa Hilliard said, he said, when you want to oppress a people, you disrupt their memory. And you work very hard to suppress any sense that they have a collective identity. Individual identity is fine, but collective identity is a problem. Now, if that collective identity is grounded in resistance to oppression, that gets you to a point. It's important to resist oppression. We have to do that. And collectively is the only way we're going to be able to do it in any formation. But is that enough? The answer, of course, is no. So building a whole identity on who you're against is absurd, because you are centering the thing you're against. It may not look like it, but why you keep appealing to them people for your humanity? The Chinese looking like, that's because y'all have no memory. You don't remember. Do you remember? You don't remember, do you? We're going to help you remember. Now, I'm sure, I haven't checked the Western press yet, but at some point they're going to call what the Chinese are doing propaganda. They're putting together this cultural thing. Okay, and what is yours? Peace Corps. What is your USAID? What is your work? The United Nations, you couldn't quite control. Remember, Harry Belafonte was a UNICEF ambassador, bringing this momentum going. But I want to mention him now in terms of this question of celebrity. His celebrity is fascinating when we look at it. We're not going to go over all the details of Harry Belafonte's life today, because obviously he's been talked about a lot, and we won't have a lot of time this morning. I'm going to have to cut it short a little bit because I've got to go over and be with these teachers. But Harry Belafonte's mother was enamored with, moved by, informed by Marcus Garvey, her fellow Jamaican. His dad's from Martinique. Belafonte spent some time as he and his brother in Jamaica growing up. 1940, their mom sent for them, and they came back to New York. He was born in New York, Harlemite. But Marcus Garvey is a representative figure. Now, he too surveilled by the FBI. In fact, J. Edgar Hoover cut his eye teeth on Marcus Garvey. And of course, Hoover would loom prominently in the life of Harry Belafonte and many of his comrades. This agent of empire. But Belafonte talks about, throughout this book, people who we would consider to be celebrities. Right? And people who we don't know, but we know because of him. Again, I'm thinking about young people. We might need to read this one together. Maybe we'll do this one in New Year's. I mean, my song is something, because he talks about not graduating from high school, as we talked about earlier in the week. His mom, disappointed by that. He joins the military, the Navy. When they come back to the United States, they have some temporary barracks in Virginia. Of course, the Navy has its deep freshwater port there. And those barracks for the Negroes were on the campus of Hampton now University, Hampton Institute at the time. And that's where he met Frances Margarita Bird, who was that was his first wife. And it's fascinating because he said, when I met her, some of the books I've been introduced to by Black men in the Navy, including W.E.B. Du Bois and others, he had Garvey from his mom and them and his people in Jamaica. He said, Margarita started introducing me to other books. And as we talked about earlier in the week, it's crazy because she grew up in D.C., from D.C., went to Dunbar High School, seemed like everybody else in the damn world. But the point is that, he's being nurtured by these various streams of Africana. And we know Du Bois was a Black internationalist. And Harry Belafonte, when he says, I'm an activist who became an entertainer, he says, it's because it was in my blood, because that's how I was raised. He was already an internationalist, and he puts that kind of stuff together. Now, he's persecuted, of course. We know that he went to the American Negro Theater when he got out of the Navy, and kind of puttering around, odd jobs, didn't know what he wanted to do. That's when he met Sidney Poitier, another son of the Caribbean. They are backbenchers, young bulls. He's trying to make it. We talked about Poitier. We won't do that again today. But when they finally get on and start doing some stage work and start being in these plays, one of the people they encounter who comes to see one of the plays they're in one night is Paul Robeson. And of course, Paul Robeson becomes a shaping figure. Paul Robeson, in terms of celebrity, one of the biggest celebrities in the world, particularly in the 1930s and 40s. And then, of course, he is attacked by the criminal enterprise called United States of America. And the same House Un-American Activity Committee that calls him forward, that tries to set Jackie Robinson against him, all that stuff we've talked about, they try to come for Belafonte, too, for his associations. But he is ultimately able to elide that. One of the things Harry Belafonte said that he learned from the life and career of Robeson, who he idolized, a Jegna for him, who helped him understand the value of anchoring yourself in the long memory of people's culture, regardless of their quote unquote racial background. I'm not about race now, I'm talking about culture. It's very different. Again, Blackness, how are we thinking about Blackness? When we talk about Black culture, what does that mean? I mean, are we conceding this racial formation? So in other words, are we just prettying up the oppression, making it easy to build a pathway to capitalist largesse and excess. In other words, we don't have a problem with you being black as long as the system remains in place. We have to ask Tommy D. Jakes about that. I don't know what's going on out there next to Tyler Perry Studios in Atlanta, where he's got this $1 billion deal with Wells Fargo, and I'm sure he means very well. But capitalism, can capitalism be reformed? Probably not, but I guess we'll find out. But the point is that he too was a celebrity. What do you do with visibility? What do you do with celebrity? Do you parlay it into another enterprise and mixed income because you want people to see people of all levels of income? Yeah, okay, well, maybe that's your choice. For Harry Belafonte, he looked at Paul Robeson. It's very interesting because Robeson was stripped of all material resources. He went from being one of the top earning entertainers in the world to not making any money after they decided you're a communist, because he was for peace and because he wouldn't condemn the Soviet Union because he had been to Russia, and he named a mountain for Paul Robeson. And people say, well, was Robeson naive? Was he supporting Stalin? Robeson was trying to grapple with the question of our common humanity in the world. Whatever he did or didn't do, that was at the center of his practice. And of course, this criminal enterprise took that as being anti-American, and it absolutely was. See, here's the problem we have. We think American means what they say it means. But again, Asa said, teachers teach by what they do. Keep on running up behind that paper. You better listen to Alton Maddox. You call them founding fathers, I call them fleeing felons. It's a contract between them. And when it doesn't suit them, they will discard it. That's what I'm reading about in Great Britain and West Africa. When it doesn't suit them, they will discard it. So we come up and say, what do we want? Justice. When do we want it? Now. That's Alton Maddox all day long. But Alton Maddox also said black people should not participate in his funky legal system. And that's from a lawyer who won his cases. Alton Maddox said, put 12 in the box, I'll win. When they came for Tawana Brawley, he said they didn't even question whether she did or was something happened to her or not. That's not the question. The question is, you're trying to persecute this young lady. And I got in my mind Mary Turner. I'm not letting you at them, and I'm not testifying. He said, well, take your license. No problem. You take my license. But guess what? You can't take my personhood. Alton Maddox spent his life teaching, but not just teaching by what he said, teaching by how he moved. He and his wife, now they rejoined the Ancestorhood, Mama Leona, who, they put together a summer camp for young people, Peg Leg Debates. They created the United at Peg Leg Debates in New York. They created the United African Movement. I was blessed a couple of times to speak there. Once at the Slave Number One. Some of y'all from Brooklyn know about the Slave Number One over on Fulton. The theater there with all the black art, and everybody came through there. Jacob Carruthers and Amos Wilson and Marimba Ani and Kwame Ture and you name it. So for me to get an invitation to come, it's just like, man, are you kidding? Are you serious right now? And then once years later at Harlem, 126th Street, the Iberia Dempsey Center, spoke there for the Maddoxes. But this notion of using your visibility to fight, Harry Belafonte said, when I saw what they did to Paul Robeson, my hero, I said, I will continue to fight because I'm an activist who happens to be an entertainer, but I gotta figure out how to do it in a way so that I can get at some of those resources to help these larger movements. It's very interesting. It's a very pragmatic choice. So in fact, Belafonte, well, I'll get to this in a minute, how he opens the book, because I'm not going to go through the whole book. I think we should read it together. Now, the more I'm talking about it, the more I'm thinking about it, because, it's his perspective on all his life and times. His perspective on his life is his perspective on his times. People may have some differing opinions about this, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it today, but I do want to point out a couple of things. By the time Belafonte hits big, he's done his little thing where he's in a nightclub singing or whatever, him and Marguerite living in New York. Then he divorces Marguerite and he marries Julie Belafonte. I think it was 1957. This is the white woman. And if they, well, how you going to be for black people? You done married a white woman. And he writes, he says, I went on the offensive. Rather than just be like, I don't know. He reached out to Ebony magazine. Again, this is a governance conversation now. And also science and technology. We start talking about print media. He says, he wrote an article, Why I Married Julie, because he couldn't avoid it. Now, mind you, by 1957, he's done Carmen Jones, because they like the way he looked. This Western aesthetic. He's kind of a blend between the African, a version. There is no one way it looked to be black, but you know what it is. Harry Belafonte had features, that kind of resemble what would be stereotypically considered European, but he wasn't European. So there's an exoticism involved. And so they pairing him with other exotics, like the great Dorothy Dandridge, of course. Eartha Kitt is floating around there, and Carmen Jones. Again, it's not minstrelsy, but what is it when you got a white opera named Carmen and then you make a black piece out of Primogen them called Carmen Jones, right? And he talks about his relationship with Dorothy Dandridge, who, as a woman of African descent, had no path for superstardom. Because there ain't but so many times you can pair her with a Negro, and you ain't gonna pair her with a white man, because you won't even pair white women with black men in a straight white male patriarchy, where black men are trying to aspire in some ways to the success of white men, and white women are just kind of around, and black women like, what the we gonna do? Well, you see that happen to Dorothy Dandridge. Dorothy Dandridge, who dies far too young in many ways because she don't have a path. She can't even do what she want to do with her celebrity. You know, Donald Bogle wrote one of the books on Dorothy Dandridge. Very important to look at. But Belafonte, by 57, is big. You know, Island in the Sun. Okay, it's got a little interracial undertones. Yeah, Belafonte is carrying Robeson with him in his mind, and he's saying, you know, with my friend Sidney Poitier, who's also poised now for superstardom as a Negro, which they don't have really models for that. Belafonte said there's certain roles I'm not going to take. So he hooks up with United Artists and, you know, begins to think about how I can acquire scripts and properties and make the kind of films I want to make, because I want to be a representative. With my celebrity, I want to parlay that into a real connection. And so he turns down certain roles. I was talking with my students about this on Thursday, last day of class at Howard, last day of my class. Last week class was last week. And we spent a little time talking about Belafonte in my hip hop class, because everybody turned their papers in, they're turning their finals in now. And so we didn't have a structured class as such. And since Mr. B made transition, I thought it was a good moment to bring him in, particularly around the question of hip hop. Remember back in 2012 when he criticized Beyonce and Jay-Z. And then one of the things Jay-Z came back with, well, you know, my presence is charity. That's the quote that was lifted out of a much larger conversation. Ultimately, the three of them sat, they had, you know, developed a relationship, this kind of thing. But at that moment, it was very contentious because Belafonte said, what you doing with your celebrity? You know, I'm gonna tell you what I was doing with my celebrity in 1964, which is where he opens the book. I raised $70,000 for SNCC and Freedom Summer, and then got Sidney Poitier, and we went down to give it to them in Mississippi, and we ended up getting chased by the Klan. And they, in fact, let me just do this right quick. I don't have a lot of time this morning, but I do want to read this. I think it's hilarious. So they get chased, right? Here they are. It's page 9 in the book, actually. As Sidney has said, we felt a lot of love in that barn. They in the barn hiding from the Klan. Outside the barn, because they had been chased, right? Outside it, though, Ku Klux Klanners sat in idling cars. We could hardly keep them out of Greenwood. That day, planes had flown overhead, dropping KKK leaflets that urged Mississippians not to let niggers steal their rights. Late that night, after a dinner of chicken and spare ribs, Sidney and I were escorted to the house where we were to sleep with armed guards patrolling outside. Our bedroom had one double bed, not too big a double bed either, shoved up against a wall under a window. Sidney blanched. Now, y'all have heard this story before, some of you. Look, I'll take the inside, okay? I told him, meaning the side by the wall. I meant it as a concession. I'd be the one scrunched in by my snoring bedmate. Sidney gave me a suspicious look. Yeah, but if someone sticks a gun through that window and shoots, I'll be more apt to get hit. He was only half joking. Okay, I'll take the outside. I said, I'm thinking, as I'm reading this, I'm thinking 1974 Buck and the Preacher. Remember the two movies that Sidney Poitier did with Harry Belafonte, including Uptown Saturday Night? Shout out to Geechee Dan Buford. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. Sidney thought about that. If I was willing to take the outside, maybe it was the better side after all. No, I'll take the outside, he said. If you do get shot, I'd hate to have to climb over your dead ass to get to the door. So now they're in bed and they sleep. Now he got awakened, Belafonte said, by a strange rasping sound. Mr. B writes, I reached over to nudge Sidney awake. The other side of the bed was empty. The rasping sound was louder. Sidney. Yes, he rasped. What the F are you doing? Push-ups, Sidney said. I can't sleep. And when those MFers come for us, I want to be sure I'm ready. It's 1964. They called them and said, we need some money. Belafonte puts all these fundraisers on and takes it to 1964, takes it to Mississippi, and they in there worried about the Klan shooting them because they done took this cash money to Mississippi. 4 years before that, Belafonte helps organize something called the Committee to Defend Martin Luther King, because in Alabama, they're going to put him in jail for tax evasion, and he needs a legal team. Belafonte, Portier, their friends, you name it. In fact, there's a great book called Stars for Freedom, Emil Raymond. This is a great book. You see Belafonte and Portier there, and that's Charlton Heston, who later lost his entire mind. Know that it's not Moses, but at any rate, if there was a Moses, but we'll talk about that another day. The point is that they raised hundreds of thousands of dollars, and one of the model for where they would go forward really was 1960, when they raised this money for the Committee to Defend Martin Luther King. Went to trial. The trial did not last. I think it lasted a week and a half, and they had all this money left over. That went to set up the structure that became the bail structure. A lot of people got bailed out of jail because Portier and Belafonte, most importantly, Harry Belafonte, who would write checks for $5,000, $20,000, $40,000, $50,000, straight to the Civil Rights Movement, straight to SNCC, straight to the Freedom Riders, 1961. All this. So when Belafonte says to Beyonce and Jay-Z, what y'all doing? This is not somebody who's talking from the sheltered rear, as Paul Robeson said, and Here I Stand. There is no sheltered rear. You got to make a choice. And whereas Jay-Z was stung and put, a little sneak diss of Harry Belafonte and fear his lyrics, ultimately he came around. Now it looks like he's closer to the T.D. Jakes model by, perhaps partnering with Roger Goodell, who, no matter how much money you pay black players in the NFL, you're making infinitely more. That's all right though, or not. But at least you can say perhaps he was influenced by Mr. B. But Mr. B would not take roles. This is where I was going in the late 50s. He said, I'm not going to take this role. And I was talking to my students in the context of the hip hop class because I was connecting the Belafonte Jay-Z back and forth. And I said, among other things we were talking about, I said, Harry Belafonte was very, very, very particular about the kind of roles he took. And as they were going to make him this huge movie star, him and his friend Sidney Poitier neck and neck. Arguably, Belafonte is farther ahead. Carmen Jones, Out in the Sun. Well, he doesn't make a movie the whole 1960s, in part because he's turning down roles. He writes about acquiring the rights, to Serve with Love. I asked the students, I said, have you ever seen the movie To Serve with Love? Of course, no hands went up. Have you heard of it? Maybe, I don't know. I said, it's based on a novel by E.R. Braithwaite. I said, somebody look up E.R. Braithwaite. They on their phones and laptops, iPads. When did he pass? I think it's 2016. Yeah, okay. When was he born? 1912. He's a man 104 years old. I said he was on this faculty. I don't know what they be telling black students at HBCUs when it comes to the momentum of memory of even their institutions. We are so caught up now with the branding and with that we don't even know the momentum of memory. The book that the movie To Serve with Love was based on was E.R. Braithwaite, and he was on the faculty at Howard for some time, and he made transition in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. at 104 years of age back in the mid-2010s. Now, what we see, though, is Belafonte trying to keep that Robeson in his mind. If you are a celebrity, there's a way that you have to represent. Meaning what? We talked about representation before. When you see me, you see us. So I got to be real careful about it. Well, Portier took the roles, Lilies of the Field. To Serve with Love, Piece of the Action, not Piece of the Action. You know what I'm thinking about with Rod Steiger. In the Heat of the Night. Get that Ray Charles soundtrack, right? But in that process, Portier vaults over Belafonte, and Belafonte and Portier have conflict around some of these roles. Belafonte said, this don't really advance us. But then again, if you ever watch in that Hot House, when Sidney Poitier slaps that white boy who says, there's a time I could have had you, Carl. And Jester Hairston is standing there looking at him like, damn, you slapped a white man in Mississippi? Did you see? I saw. Right. Steiger. arguably that's an advance, at least in terms of resistance. But Poitier is grappling, Belafonte is grappling with that. By the end of the 60s now, into the early 1970s, he comes back. You know, that's when you get Bucket the Preacher. That's when you get, you know, Piece to Action, you know, the supporting role. But ultimately he plays a gangster. I think 1996, Kansas City, he plays a gangster. That's the film, Kansas City, Robert Altman. But Belafonte is less a genre-shaped celebrity than he is this kind of transcendent figure. And his presence, Jay-Z says, my presence is charity. No, Belafonte's presence ensured other people. He used his Rolodex. He used his network. He used his persona. He rolled up on Eisenhower one time to the White House. They up in there, right? He saw Martin Luther King at Abyssinian Baptist Church. They sat and talked. And here come Jack Kennedy in 1960 saying, I need to get some celebrities, Negro celebrities to endorse me. Will you endorse me? Belafonte said, you need to talk to Martin Luther King. You know, I don't believe celebrities should be endorsing political candidates. You need to talk to the people who represent us. Oh, what the hell? What do you do with celebrity? Can you imagine celebrities today turning that off and turning that down, saying, no, you need to talk to so-and-so? And that's what Belafonte did, not just with with John Kennedy, but with his brother, Bobby Kennedy. That's when, you know, they had that meeting over at Bobby Kennedy's apartment on Central Park South, and James Baldwin and Lorraine Hansberry, and they tore him to pieces, and Bobby Kennedy was mad. And Martin Luther King asked Harry Belafonte, who was at the meeting, how did it go? And Belafonte's like, yeah, well, it was a disaster. And then King was like, you know what? That's probably what he needed to hear. I'm saying all that to say that, you know, what do you do with your celebrity? You bring these people together. And then you say, I'm not going to swerve for what I support. And if you want to be at me, you're going to have to be with the rest of them. And what his book, I mean, so many other books. There's another great book on Belafonte. I forget the name of it now, as I left it at the house. But Becoming Harry Belafonte, I think is the name of the book. But what we see in the life of Harry Belafonte is a very determined and deliberate dedication of using his celebrity as a weapon. When you use your celebrity as a weapon, you can then continue to galvanize, not only support, but reframe the way we think about ourselves, because people are enamored with celebrities. When Harry Belafonte would use his celebrity, he would often come and spend time with young people. In fact, as we were talking on Thursday in class, a sister have an enormous amount of respect for, limitless really, Miss Alma Kemp, who for many years was the chief administrative aide to Dean James Donaldson, now an ancestor, the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, just a towering figure in Black intellectual circles and academia. Miss Kemp, who in many ways kept the college running. I saw her in the hallway. Now she's retired, but like a lot of people of African descent, she's still around, you know, helping out the college, helping out the university. You always want to keep these elders around if you can. You must treat them with the highest respect. So Miss Kemp happened to be in Elaine Locke Hall on Thursday afternoon. I saw her going by as I was in the front of the class, and I saw her in the back. I saw her. I said, hey, Miss Kemp. How you doing? I said, Miss Kemp, do you mind coming in the doorway for a minute? She came in. I said, Miss Kemp, when was Harry Belafonte? Remember when Harry Belafonte came here? I know you the one set it up. So when was that? Because he would come from time to time. He did colleges all the time, including HBCUs. She said, that was 2005, Dr. Carr, her mind like a Rolodex. I said, thank you, Miss Kemp. I said, I remember that. She said, yeah, he came. He was over in Crampton Auditorium, and everybody came. And these students don't know that. In fact, many of them weren't even born. 2005, 15, 25, take off to 18 years old. If they were here, they had just gotten here. They weren't even preschool age, really, most of them. And so we kept talking. About 10 minutes later, here comes Miss Kemp. And one of our students, one of our African American Studies majors, Christiana, came in with a flyer. Miss Kemp had gone into her stash. This is the other thing. Y'all keep your archives. I don't know how she produced it that quickly, but she gave Chris this to get to me. This is the flyer. Howard University College of Arts and Sciences presents an evening with Harry Belafonte, Mr. Harry Belafonte, The Long Walk to Courage. This is 2005. So I said, oh my God, Chris. I said, Chris, catch Miss Kemp, ask her to make some copies. Who want a copy? Students put their hand up. So Ms. Kemp made some copies, and I put this in the hands of those young people. I said, now y'all take that, put it up somewhere and frame it. Because you want to be able to keep the momentum of memory going. We always grabbing for the new thing. What's the new thing? What's the new thing? But our open enemies never grab the new thing. They cultivate us to grab the new thing, and then they go to the cemetery and dig up James Madison and make you kiss the ring. Now, they'll even let you play around James Madison or Alexander Hamilton, as long as it's Hamilton. You understand? So is it really progress to do a blackface minstrelsy of Hamilton? Yeah, I ain't gonna get on Hamilton because y'all know how I feel about that. But the point is this: Mr. Belafonte is talking about representation. What do you do with celebrity? And he's using his celebrity as a wedge, as a battering ram. And then the rest of the book is in 3 parts. So he talks about the difficult choices that come with that. He paid, for example, for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to go to Guinea. Members of SNCC after Freedom Summer. Ms. Hamer was on that trip. Fannie Lou Hamer met Sekou Touré of Guinea, the president of Guinea, who Mr. Belafonte criticizes in the book in part because Miriam Makeba, his friend, he is the one who facilitated Miriam Makeba coming to the United States and injecting this whole strain of African music. He does recordings with her, album with her. Harry Belafonte presents Miriam Makeba. Very important. He's balancing it though, because one of the things he talks about as well is he doesn't believe in just doing the thing the way it was done before. He wants to contemporize it, which is why he had a little bit of rough turbulence with the Africans of the Caribbean, particularly Trinidad, when the social structure people want to call him the Calypso King. Why are you calling him the Calypso King? Said the Trinis. We crown a Calypso King every year in our governance formation. Y'all Trinis know that. Belafonte ain't no damn Calypso King. Is he Mighty Sparrow? No. No. You want to call him Calypso King, but can anybody argue? Shake, 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 Sonora, shake your body right. Work, 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 Sonora, work it all the time. My girl's name is Sonora. I tell you, boy, I adore her. Oh, man, that's my joint. Jump in the line, rock your body on time. Okay, I believe you, jump in the line. Sonora's dance has no title. You jump in the saddle, hold on to the bridle, jump in the line, rock your body on time. Somebody help me. Right. It's not the Calypso of the island, but it introduces the world. He's there at that thing. What do you do? Now, there are generations, tickled me. Where were we? Bro, I'm trying to remember where we were. Was it, or it might have been Thursday night, Rolling Show. Somebody mentioned the grandbaby said, oh, that's the man that sang that song at the end of Beetlejuice. Right. I mean, you don't even know, you know what I'm saying? But the whole idea of injecting that into the culture. But he's on that line. Now, there are moments when he's making political decisions. For example, when he was involved in the anti-apartheid movement. Of course, friends with Randall Robinson, we talked about Trans-Africa. I mean, organized these big rallies, you know. Then, of course, the anti-famine work with We Are the World and Michael Jackson, who co-wrote that song. All these kind of interventionist moments where he's using his tool. When Mandela gets out and does his tour, world tour, and comes to the United States, he comes to Washington, D.C. And when he comes to Washington, D.C., he calls Harry Belafonte over at this big rally they're going to have. All these people out here cheering for him to come out on stage. They got all the dignitary seats there. They're backstage. And he says, Harry, I've got a problem. I need you to fix it. What's the problem? That guy over there. Who is that? That's Marion Barry. But Marion Barry had been arrested on the drug charge. And Belafonte writes that it was torture because he said, Marion Barry, the mayor, this is the man who gave all DC resources to get Martin Luther King's birthday a national holiday. Every time they come in to protest, come in anti-apartheid. When he was mayor, opened the whole place. And Belafonte says, this guy, and I've known him since the SNCC days, since he was the chair of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He said, but Mandela, who is a pragmatist of his own, even as they had to give him special clearance to come in the country because the criminal enterprise, so many people love and seem to think has a rule of law, was like the African National Congress is on the domestic, on the international terrorist list, and we got to give you a special pass, you and your wife and them to come in. But when he says, I don't know what to do. I mean, I might tell Marion Barry, you can't embrace this man on stage, even though we in your city and you're beloved. So he says, fortunately, I breathed a sigh of relief because as we all walked out on the stage, Marion Barry started walking toward Mandela and then turned and sat down in his seat because Marion Barry made a choice too. This is all pragmatism, which is why when you see people engaged in indefensible acts of patronage, like Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, Brett Kavanaugh having his investigation short-circuited and scrubbed, and John Boyd Roberts sitting as the Chief Justice looking the other way, Mr. Balls and Strikes, you know, don't have any truck for trying to somehow prop up their fraud as if we're going to have a decent conversation with the same set of rules. Ain't no same set of rules. Y'all crucified Marion Barry behind some a drug thing, and these cats stealing billions and making decisions about your life, stripping you of the right to vote, stripping you of control over your own body, sending you to jail forever. I don't care if it's new evidence, death penalty. And we don't have a comparative framework. As Alton Maddox said, this is a criminal enterprise, and if you participate in it and give it legitimacy, you are going to be victim of it. When I go in the courtroom, Alton Maddox appeared before you had a special committee in the New York State Legislature to talk about ethics and lawyers. And Alton Maddox appears before this committee, and he says, after he roasts them, he says, now before I sit down, because I am going to sit down before you all tell me my time is up, because I'm not going to give you the pleasure of saying your time is up. You have to sit down. He said, I don't plead. I'm not here to beg because I don't believe in plea bargains. I don't ask for plea bargains. When I go in the courtroom, I go in the court to win. And he said, I don't think Black people should participate in your criminal system. That's why they had to take that man's ability to practice law, because not only did he take that attitude, he would go in the courtroom and win. Anyway, I'm going to begin to wrap this up because I just mentioned a few people here. And I'm going to look down in the chat here in Nubia, and later on, and I'll be reading it, obviously, when we go into the YouTube territory. Oh, wow. Oh, it's Laura's birthday. Happy birthday. Yeah, Kate Kennedy says J.R. Smith's documentary shows this criminal enterprise. No question. No question. Oh, yeah. Okay, we all April babies out here. All right, very good. But that's a beautiful thing. I'm going to mention just a couple of other things. We have to, well, we don't have to do anything, but it would be nice. It would be liberating. It might even free us if we take very seriously this question of intergenerational dialogue. One of the things Mr. Belafonte did for the last few decades is spend a lot of time with young people. At the beginning of our conference the other day, Kamal Rashid, or 950. I better get out. I'm gonna take about 5 more minutes. They're gonna be looking for me they're looking for me now, but you know what? I'm here. Kamal Rashid, who's the president of our Midwest region of ASCAC, said he quoted a Kiswahili proverb. He said, "If the elders keep quiet, the children will get lost." We have to think about intergenerational work. Michael Flegger, Father Flegger out of Chicago, Roland was talking to him the other night. And he talked about how Harry Belafonte was disinvited to speak, give the eulogy at Coretta Scott King's funeral, because they wanted all the living presidents in attendance. This is when Bishop Eddie Long was riding high at New Birth in Georgia. And George W. Bush said, if Belafonte's speaking, I'm not coming. So Eddie Long caved. What do you do with celebrity?
What?
Yeah, he caved. This is not rumor, because Father Flegger and Harry Belafonte were to meet the morning of the funeral for breakfast, and they were already in town. You know, I mean, Harry Belafonte paid for Martin Luther King. You know, he was very close, as we know. In fact, he writes in the book about how Dr. King would not, you know, he had no money for help for Coretta the kid. Harry Belafonte paid for housekeeper Harry Belafonte, and then he took out very quietly a life insurance policy on Dr. King after King was killed, 68. You know, that money comes out. He's constantly doing this. And so what happens? Eddie Long said, you can't speak. Father Flegger said, I called him. I said, where you at, Harry? I'm in the round waiting for you. He said, I'm not coming What do you mean? He told him what Bush said, what Eddie Long did. And notice I haven't mentioned a certain person who died in 1955, August 1955, but her body caught up with her reputation and her character in eternal death. I'm not going to mention her name because I think social media did such a chef's kiss. I don't know what Eddie Long was grappling with on the other side, and I don't know what George W. Bush will grapple with, but he is the one that said, nah, if he's speaking, I ain't coming. Say disinvited him, and Harry Belafonte, Father Flegger said that hurt him to his core. He couldn't even come. And he said, you can come sit in the audience. I can't even go over there. How would y'all? And eventually he reached out. I mean, Martin King III was in New York and they embraced each other, this kind of thing. But ultimately, when you take certain stands, our enemies will let us know what they think of you. And we have to ask ourselves, is it worth the price of your soul to go along, to get along? The life of Harry Belafonte gives us a lot of lessons, and we only touched on a few of them this morning. So I'm gonna pause with that because I'm gonna go these
Listen, there's so much, and I want
so
to
much.
and I'm glad that you're where you are. Tell Sharif El-Mekki and all of the amazing educators hello. There's a whole lesson on Duke Ellington that I had in my mind. Maybe I'll pop in on Monday and ask you about him because today is his birthday.
Should we do that? We want to do Monday? You know what, y'all? Let's do office hours on Monday on the Duke.
Yeah, I'm going down a rabbit hole about him, and I just had so many questions. But I'm so
Ellington is we know what, let's do that because of course Sonny Rollins is still around, and Ahmad Jamal, who made transition a couple of weeks ago, he was Billy Strayhorn's paper boy in Pittsburgh. So of course no Strayhorn, no take the A train. Oh yeah, we definitely